Anyone who has ever considered writing has heard the refrain, "Write what you know." It's standard advice for aspiring writers. It's worked for John Grisham, Dick Francis, Scott Turow. Now we add a new name. And this author expertly leads us into exciting territory she knows very well. The place, Manhattan and the Hamptons. The timing, the fall of Lehman Brothers in the fall of 2008. What did Lehman's meltdown mean to the big players on Wall Street, to the hedge funders, to their wives, to Page Six? The Recessionistas is a novel that not only introduces the reader to the world of Wall Street and high society and its intimacies, it also acquaints us with lots of love-to-hate characters. The way some of these characters talk to each other, or not talk to each other, is chilling, and it rings with gut-wrenching authenticity. I hate John Cutter. I have known a John Cutter. Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Howard Nemeroff is credited with having said, "Write what you know, that should leave you with a lot of free time." Free time, however, is something that I doubt our guest today has a lot of. She is the president and CEO of Lebenthal and Company, a municipal bond specialist founded by her grandparents in 1925, and she is president and CEO of its wealth management division, Alexandra and James. She is a frequent commentator on television and makes frequent appearances in the media. She's a contributing editor for New York SocialDiary.com, serves as a board member of the School of American Ballet, and is involved in many other leading New York cultural institutions. This woman from the storied family emerges now as a novelist with a great story, The Recessionistas. I feel like I should have castanets when I say that. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you our guest speaker for tonight. Please join me in welcoming Alexandra Lebenthal.
Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction, and I have to say, just hearing people say the names of the people that I concocted and talking about some of the things that went on just takes me right back into how much I really enjoyed writing this book. As you said, I have grown up in New York City and I have grown up on Wall Street since the time I was a little girl. I was used to going down to visit my grandmother at the office, for she worked until she was 93 years old, so I had great exposure to her and to the other members of my family, my dad, of course, who were in our business. I have always, though, been fascinated in business and the history of business and the human stories that go on in Wall Street and in other companies. I've read just about every book that there is on Wall Street, whether it's the Morgan Stanley book called Blue Blood and Mutiny, whether it was Too Big to Fail, whether it was House of Cards, or The Devil's Casino. I find all of those stories fascinating, and in many of the cases I actually have known a number of the people in those books and am intimately aware of how much politics actually plays a role in every company. I have joked to many men on Wall Street that I think that once men get out of school where they no longer have balls and bats to hit each other with, that they actually turn into the biggest group of high school girls that I have ever seen. And many of these men have actually laughed and agreed with me. I actually quote that in the book as well. I am also active in the New York social scene and see either many of the same people that are on Wall Street or see their wives and see how they interact in the social world. I have somehow been given this horrible moniker called a socialite, which I don't deserve because a socialite is someone who works full-time at going to parties. And so I was thrilled when New York Magazine, not necessarily so nicely, described me as a CEO-cialite. So that is the title to which I would prefer to be referred. As I spent more and more time on the social scene, however, I encountered a man by the name of David Patrick Columbia. He is the editor of New York Social Diary. And it's actually he who should have written this book because he knows a million more stories than I do, and each and every day manages to comment on what's going on in the world with a great sense of social observation. Well, in the spring of 2008, I approached him and I said, you need someone to write a financial column on the New York Social Diary website. He said, oh, okay, well, let's think about that. We got together. I gave him some ideas of things I would write about, and I started writing articles, and they're sort of your basic dry, how to invest your assets, how to protect things, how to, allocate. And I saw him a few months later, and he said, we got to talk. And I thought, oh, God, I'm getting canned. But I was going to, fine, we tried it, no problem. So we arranged to have lunch one day at Swifty's on the Upper East Side. This was about 2 weeks after Lehman Brothers had failed. And as we were sitting at lunch, he said, Alexandra, here is the thing. You live in a world that most of our readers don't. I know you think all of our readers are the people who are seeing their pictures every day from all the parties that we run, but they're not. They're people who live in Tennessee and Montana, and they're fascinated by what's going on in the world of society. They're confused and perplexed by what's going on Wall Street right now. And you live in both of those worlds. You have a voice that no one else has. So think about that. That's what I want you to write about. Okay, I left. I walked up to Park Avenue, and I saw a building on Park and 72nd Street, and I just happened to look up to, I don't know, the 10th floor or so, and I saw beautiful window treatments, silk curtains, and you could tell that it was a gorgeous apartment inside just by seeing those curtains. And I thought, gosh, I wonder who lives there. I wonder if they work at Lehman. I wonder if they work at Bear Stearns. I wonder if they're over-leveraged, if they've lost everything. I wonder if the wife works and if she understands what's going on. And all of a sudden, I kind of went, oh my gosh, that's what he was saying. I do know who lives there because I see them at business events. I see them at social events. And I could sort of make up somebody who actually lives there. So I went home, I sat down, and I just started writing this fictional story of Blake and Grigsby Somerset. And he worked at Lehman, and indeed their lives were over-leveraged, and they were going through the panic of how do you cut down when every expense has become second nature to you and you think that you cannot live without millions of dollars a year. Sent it off to David. He emailed back, this is fabulous. This is exactly what I was thinking of. And so my column was truly born on that day, and I started doing this series of fictional columns. So one of the things that started to happen was women I knew would come up to me and say, I love your columns, and I totally understand what's happening. For the first time, I get what's going on in the financial world. And I realized that there was sort of something going on here. And then, of course, there's, each column I felt like I had to do a better job and come up with something more interesting. But every time I sent a new column to David, he was thrilled with it, and it just was something that was filling me with joy, that I was communicating with people and that I was making up these great stories. So, as often happens, a book agent contacted me and said, I think this would make a great novel. Met with a couple publishers, got an offer from Grand Central Books, who seemed from the beginning to sort of get that I was sort of part and parcel of this world. And so I started writing the book last Memorial Day, and I would write at night. I would write on the weekends while we were driving out to the beach. I would have my laptop. I'd be in the front seat. I'd write on the weekends, and then the book was due the day after Labor Day. So the last 2 weeks of the summer when I take vacation, I basically wrote the whole vacation. And I found that writing fiction is only governed by your imagination and the world that indeed you know. There were times when I got a little bit stumped, and I'd stop and I'd go away for a while, and it really happened that the characters would kind of somehow reveal where they wanted to go next. So when I turned it in, it was just such a thrill to realize that I had written 97,000 words, and that this book indeed was going to come out. So I thought that I would talk to you a little bit about why I wrote this specific story, and then I am going to read a little bit from the book. Since I already knew that I was connecting with the readers from New York Social Diary, I also knew that the financial crisis was obviously one of the biggest stories that any of us would ever go through. And I also knew how people in the financial community were dealing with it, and I knew the drama behind it, and I knew, the books that were already coming out about it. So how could I tell this tale? Who were the main characters that would be a part of the story? What real events were going to be a part of the book? And what was I just going to create in terms of what might have happened? So I have my main characters. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. But really the main character is the financial crisis itself. If and when you do read the book, I urge you to read at the very end, after it says the end, there is a word from the author, and it's 2.5 pages that actually talks about what really happened without the fiction. But to me, it was very, very important to actually talk about what really went on in the world. So now let's talk a little bit about real people and the plot. I wanted to have enough variation that I could emphasize different people and different perspectives, but that all those people would be connected in some way. So let me just first read you from the inside cover, which unfortunately I did not write, the publishers wrote, but I think it's a great synopsis of the plot. It's the day after Labor Day 2008, and the elite universe of New York's Upper East Side is about to collapse right along with the economy. Socialite Grigsby Somerset is barely aware of the seismic changes taking place and has no idea her investment banker husband, Blake, is entering into a devil's bargain with hedge fund owner John Cutter. But as autumn unfolds, Grigsby's fairy tale life starts to unravel. It's too much for her to be asked to turn on a dime and not spend one. Renee Parker is a street-smart executive assistant just hired to work for John Cutter, and she's convinced that something is amiss with her new boss. She enlists her friend, Sasha Silver, CEO of bond manager Silver Partners, to help her decipher what's what. They soon discover that John's fund is in danger of blowing up, except for the assets he's hiding in the Cayman Islands from his wife, Mimi, and that he's concocted a scheme with Blake Somerset to redeem himself. So a little bit about the characters. Indeed, Grigsby Somerset. She's vapid, she's materialistic, she has no interest in the world and anything outside of her own world. I hate to tell you, she's from Darien. I just couldn't make everything outside of Connecticut beat Greenwich, so I just threw that in. Little did I know that I would be here tonight. She is a queen bee, and there are only a few things more in her life that she wants: to get her daughter into Spence for kindergarten, to have a house on the ocean instead of the bay, to have a condo in Aspen, and perhaps her own assistant. She's not particularly likable, but she's also pragmatic, and in the end, she realizes what she needs to do to make her own decisions. Her husband, Blake, he's handsome, but not overly so. He's not dumb, but he's not brilliant. He's not happy with his life or his lifestyle, which has been chosen for him by his wife. He's certainly not happy what it takes to maintain that lifestyle. He is weak and he is malleable. Sasha Silver. She is smart, funny, gorgeous, witty, caring. She's the voice of conscience. I have no idea who she's based on. She works on Wall Street. She loves fashion. She loves going out. She does it all. She has 4 children. Her weak spot, though, is waiting for someone else to work things out for her and to say, "It's okay, I fixed it all for you." Renee Parker. She grew up in Harlem. Her father is a bus driver. Her mother is a maid, ironically, for Grigsby Somerset. She went to Spence. She was part of the Prep for Prep program. Her attitude about everything in life is that I'm here and I'm going to make the best of it. Everywhere she goes in life, even when she was at Spence, with one exception, everyone always wanted to be around her. People were always at her house. She is the type of person we would all want to be, with no insecurities whatsoever. Mimi Cutter is a woman who has lost herself and has become, as her chapter opens, a clown. She's married to John Cutter. She was married to John Cutter. They're in the process of getting divorced. Over the years, as he made more and more money, she began losing herself. And it started in little bits and pieces, starting to dress strangely, a bit freakishly, taking people's advice about what she should wear. And then she started with some plastic surgery, some nips, some tucks, some injections, you name it. And now she really doesn't even look like herself. In a way, she's the saddest character, and I have to say, when I reread the epilogue, I actually cry a little bit because I'm very pleased with what happens to her in the end. And then, indeed, there is John Cutter. He's brilliant, he's gorgeous, he's a fantastically successful hedge fund manager. He's terrible, he's obnoxious, he's rude to everyone who works for him. He curses left and right, and he is on the verge of disaster. There are a host of other characters with funny names like Thrus Cogson and Dr. Yanni Galifianakis and Amanda Belden, who all are a part of this story. And they all have the power at the end of the book to make their own choices and to decide where they want their lives to go. So, having given you that, I'm going to read from a chapter called The Weekend the World Ended, which is the weekend of September 12th to 15th. When the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy happened, the AIG bailout happened, the sale to Bank of America of Merrill Lynch happened, and obviously the world very much did change for many, many people. I'm going to read, what I did in this chapter was I go through each day and I have different characters doing different things. Some based on actual events and then others, as I said, somewhat made up. So I'm going to read from a little bit of Friday, September 12th first, where we check in on Blake and Grigsby. As Blake left for work on Friday, Grigsby said, "What time do you want to leave for Southampton this evening?" There were only 1 or 2 more weekends in the country before their social life would shift to the city until the following spring. They would continue to go to Southampton here and there, but trips would invariably be replaced by children's soccer games, weekend dinner parties, and periodic jaunts to Palm Beach to visit Grigsby's parents. "Grigsby, I really don't know what's going to happen today," he responded. "They've asked everyone in a senior capacity in my group to stand by because of the potential deal with Barclays or Bank of America. So I will be spending the weekend at the office. We're going to have to stay here and keep the weekend open." Grigsby responded with exasperation. "Are you kidding me? Can't the management of the firm work things out? I told the Donaldsons last week that we would have dinner with them tomorrow night at Red Star." With everything on his mind, Blake was finding it harder to deal with Grigsby's complete lack of appreciation for the seriousness that current events held for them. It was like talking to a child sometimes. He couldn't deal with this now. "Griggs, I can't discuss this on the fly, and I'm going to be late for my meeting. I'll call you later, okay?" he said, deciding it would be better to deal with it by phone this afternoon when he could just say, "We aren't going, period," than to get into a discussion now. Grigsby, for her part, was always ready to put off a discussion, because in her mind it meant she had won. In fact, there was a great deal weighing on Blake's mind that was tied directly to the future of Lehman Brothers. On Thursday, the stock had closed at $4.22 a share, down almost half in one day alone, and amazingly, it was likely to go down more today unless a deal to sell the company was announced before the market closed. Blake almost couldn't believe that as recently as June, the stock had traded at nearly $35 a share. It had dropped like a rock since he came back from vacation, if you could call it that. If the financial crisis had shown one thing, it was how fast and far a once healthy blue-chip stock could fall. It was one thing in 2001 when internet companies went from 100 to 1. They had no revenues. But these were companies that generated billions of dollars a year. They were the foundation of the financial system. It was crazy. 9 months ago, Blake Somerset had been worth nearly $55 million, but today, that number was $4 million. $4 million? He almost laughed. He hadn't had that little in years. There was no way the Somersets could afford their very expensive lifestyle without their Lehman holdings. For every year, a portion of Blake's annual bonus was paid in stock. And even if he wanted to sell, which he didn't, it would have been impossible to do so. Employees were prohibited from selling new shares for 5 years. And he had gotten most of what he had in the last 5 years. If he and Grigsby had to live solely on his base salary of $250,000, they couldn't begin to survive. So they lived bonus to bonus. But while he wasn't allowed to sell the stock, he was able to borrow against it, which he did constantly. Every year, he would pay off the loan in January with the cash portion of his bonus, but by the next month, he'd start borrowing all over again. He really felt like Sisyphus. Somehow, he could never manage to get the rock all the way up the hill and get it to stay there. He hoped he would reach that point one day, but Grigsby also seemed to have her own agenda. Invariably, she came up with some additional necessary thing they absolutely needed to have. The house on the bay had been a tough nut for them. Yes, it was a gorgeous house and he loved being there, but it cost a lot to buy and it cost a lot to maintain, with the pool, landscaping, boat, and caretaker. Now she was angling for a house on the ocean and had started dropping a few hints about a house or condo in Aspen. Her latest thing was talking about how she needed her own assistant. He actually laughed at that thought. Her own assistant? For what? Making hair appointments? What the hell did she actually do all day? There was no way any of these things were going to happen for a long, long time. With the stock this low, he just hoped he'd be able to keep what they had now. He could only have a loan that was 50% of what his shares were worth, and he'd already sold most of his other investments. He still had an outstanding loan of nearly $2 million. Right now, he could just barely make it. If Lehman announced they were being sold today, it would be a relief, and pretty much common knowledge that it was going to be either Bank of America or Barclays. Just like Bear Stearns 6 months before, Lehman sported a great big invisible bullseye on its back, and the firm's leadership could do nothing to escape the bullets coming directly their way. A sale was the only hope right now. The last week had been critical. For several months, it was well known that the firm had been having conversations with Korea's investment arm to make a sizable investment in the firm. If that happened, hopefully it would be enough to at least stabilize the stock price. It had worked so far for other companies that had been trying to raise capital. Tuesday, however, there'd been an announcement that the discussions had ended. Boom. That was it. Over and done with. At that point, everyone could tell as soon as they walked into the building in the morning that there was a mad scramble going on 31, the executive floor, to try and figure out a solution. Outside, sharks were circling, and thus the decline in the stock price over the last 2 days. The next morning, Lehman's management decided to hold its second quarter earnings call early. They announced staggering losses of nearly $4 billion, but also that they'd be spinning off some assets. Lehman's chairman, Dick Fuld, who was one of the longest-serving CEOs on the street and also a great trader who knew when to hold out for the winning trade, said on the call, "This firm has a history of facing adversity and delivering. We have a long track record of pulling together when times are tough and then taking advantage of global opportunities." In any other time, that would have been a great rallying cry, reminding people internally and externally that this was a great firm that had been through a lot in its 150 years. However, 2008 was different from any other time or crisis. Ironically, words of encouragement and perseverance were now interrupted by everyone as meaning that the end was near. Internally, it was like a death watch for most of Wednesday and Thursday, with despondency being the main emotion, along with a healthy dose of Wall Street gallows humor. Even with all the uncertainty and anxiety in the air, Blake hoped and expected that if the worst happened and no other company wanted to buy them, at least the government would intervene. Lehman was too integral to the world financial markets. If the Federal Reserve and Treasury had shown anything over the last several weeks, it was that they were willing to step in and prevent an outright collapse of the financial system. They wouldn't just let Lehman fail. No way. Grigsby had a busy day ahead of her. She was almost done with all the school applications, and she had a committee meeting for the museum benefit coming up. After that, she was going to Bergdorf Goodman for the Blue Shoe Has Arrived, a celebration of the sumptuous blue satin Manolo Blahnik evening pump with the rhinestone buckle made famous in the Sex and the City movie. What was more, Mr. Blahnik himself was going to be making an appearance. It was as if God himself were going to be parked in the second floor shoe salon. Because Grigsby was such a good client at Bergdorf's, she was usually invited to events they held there, but it was going to be tough to make it on time. One would think that simply running a few errands and going to lunch would leave most of the day free, but in fact, it was just the opposite. Fitting in her workouts, child drop-off, and pickups was very tough logistically. What was worse was that Fifth and Park, between the hours of 10 and 3, were always a tangle of vans and trucks delivering furniture, flowers, and supplies to parties, not to mention contractors, glaziers, painters, and a host of other laborers working on the perennial renovations of the multi-million-dollar apartments that lined the avenues. As a result, it could take Grigsby nearly twice as long as normal to get from Park and 93rd to 5th and 57th. Life could be very hard at times. So before I read one more section, I did obviously try and do some research and make sure I had the stock price of Lehman correct as the decline happened. I did quote directly from Dick Fold on what he said that day. And then I thought, well, I really do need a real event that Grigsby Somerset might have gone to. And so I went on Patrick McMullen, the party photo site, and put in the date. And lo and behold, when I saw that Bergdorf Goodman had that event that day, I just had this moment of thinking, thank you. This is so perfect. So it was great that it all worked out that way. Now, I'm going to skip forward. I was going to read a little bit from Saturday, but I'm going to skip forward to Sunday afternoon when Sasha is going to the manicure salon for her weekly manicure. And this actually, I was at the manicure salon, so I'll tell you a little bit more after I read the section. Sasha went for her weekly manicure at Peachy Nails on Sunday afternoon. She'd been following the news all day on her BlackBerry to see who was going to buy Lehman. Not only did she have a lot of friends who worked there, but she knew that the financial system needed stability. It was deeply disconcerting that yet another large player in the market might disappear, the second time this year. But if Lehman could be removed as a concern and absorbed by a stronger company, that would be a good signal for the markets. As she was sitting in the chair and had just said ballet slippers, her usual color, to the manicurist, she got an email from Adam. Hearing BST gave a DK to LEH. BAC buying ML. SH''T show Monday. Exclamation point, exclamation point. Oh my God, she said out loud to no one in particular. When people looked up, she felt the need to explain herself and said to the assorted women, my husband just emailed me. It looks like Barclays isn't buying Lehman, and neither is Bank of America. They're buying Merrill Lynch. There were shocked looks and gasps. One woman started saying, oh no, oh no, oh no, and two women got up in a hurry to leave, one with paper towels still coiled around her wet toenails, while the salon staff clucked behind her saying, not dry, 2 more minutes. Kimmy, the proprietress, said in broken English, what this mean, Mommy? Sasha couldn't help but smile, even now that she was always referred to as Mommy, as were many other women who'd been coming in with their daughters since they could sit still and hold out their tiny digits for bright pink nails with green flowers painted on them. It was probably the same at every other Korean manicure salon on the tiny island of Manhattan. Well, Kimmy, it's not very good, not good at all. There's a company on Wall Street which handles investments, like stocks and bonds. It's called Lehman Brothers. And like many other companies, it made some very bad decisions. So now, as a result, it's in very bad shape. Everyone thought they were going to be bought by 1 or 2 other companies, but those deals appear to have fallen through, and now they may have to declare bankruptcy. It's very bad for them, the stock market, and the economy. And probably not so good for your nail salon, Kimmy, she thought. To her surprise, Kimmy erupted with, oh no, just like the Bear Company. Not good, I own the Lehman stock. And she started cursing in Korean, or so Sasha assumed. If Sasha could have called a market top, the moment it hit its high point, it probably would have been the day that Kimmy instructed her broker to go long Lehman. So I was indeed at actually Iris Nails on 92nd and Madison, but wanted to protect the names of the innocent. And while it didn't exactly happen that way, what was shocking was that normally on a Sunday afternoon, people are reading Glamour and Vogue, they're relaxing, they're talking with their friends. People are not thinking about the markets or the world at large. And that day in Iris Nails, when it was actually someone else who yelled about from their BlackBerry, you could feel the nervousness and the fear. It was indeed palpable. And of course, as the night went on and we all watched CNBC and then saw what happened the next day, it's one of those moments that I truly will never forget where I was. So I wanted to read those sections because, to me, they are indicative of what was going on in people's lives and also these very, very real events that were going on. The next chapter in the book, by the way, is called Party Like It's 1999, and it takes place at the New Yorkers for Children benefit, which was indeed that next Monday night. So AIG had been bailed out, Lehman had declared bankruptcy, and at Cipriani's on 42nd Street, everyone was partying as if everything was always the same, and yet we all knew that we were completely on the verge of the precipice, and no one quite knew what was going to happen next. So I will say in the book, and then I'll wrap it up, I tried to have some social commentary. I tried to have explanations and education about the markets, and I tried to have a fun, juicy story to boot that people would want to follow. I had a really great, fun time writing this, and some people look at me rather strangely, just as I looked at my friend who recently completed an Ironman triathlon and said it was the most fun she'd ever had as a grown-up. We all have things that inspire us and make us happy, and for me, this has just been one of the best parts of my life to date, and I'm just loving being an author. I'm loving talking about the book, and most of all, I'm loving everyone who is reading the book. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes?
First of all, thank you so much for being with us.
You're
I
welcome.
look forward to reading the book. I don't recall the terms that you used when you had the luncheon with the editor of New York
Social Diary, right.
New York Social Diary. That's a new one for me, okay? However, people in Middle America probably more so going west than coming closer to New York and the Gold Coast. Did he not indicate perhaps that not only were people perplexed as to what was going on, but absolutely mortified, disgusted, appalled by the largesse of the way people were living, which was really built to a very large extent on a house of cards.
Yes, and that is part of what his daily commentary is as well. Now, bear in mind that this was still relatively early in the whole populist anger that later arose. And when the whole bonus situation occurred 4 or 5 months later, I did actually do another column because I was just so struck by how much anger there was, and not just anger at individual people, but almost anger at our capitalist system. Okay, it was funny, I was skiing actually in Colorado when I was thinking about writing this column, and not in Aspen, it's Crescent Butte, Colorado, which is sort of, very mellow and laid back. And I'm on my BlackBerry typing something away, and this guy who just competed in some downhill, telemarketing competition said, "Wow, you're really busy. What are you doing? Writing a book?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm writing a column." And I said, "I'm just curious, are you aware of what's happened with AIG and government bailouts?" And this guy just looked at me like completely clueless. So Crescent Butte, Colorado is hardly the place to get that sense. But yes, very much so. And I am also conscious that I paint some pretty unattractive people. Who you're not supposed to love, and who you're supposed to have a sense of Schadenfreude about. 9th grade English, Mrs. Wien, remember that word? A sense of Schadenfreude of, good, I'm glad that this happens to them. Now, I am an eternal optimist, so a lot of the stories sort of tie up neatly. But yes, I think that anger is still with us. I think it's diminished somewhat. I think we'll see how much in November. But that's been very much a part of how I've thought about things, and how David does as well.
And on the flip side, when you haven't read anything from the chapter at Cipriani, I really look forward to reading this. But there is very much of a black side to all of this. The level, a very, very significant level of domestic violence that has taken over some of our wealthiest families on our Gulf Coast, child abuse, the skyrocketing level of divorce. It's more than just how am I going to pay my gardener this week.
Well, I mean, obviously there's a lot that's gone on, and I'm certainly aware of that. We actually have a specialty in our wealth management business that deals with the financial aspects of divorce. So, that's part and parcel of everything that's gone on. Is there another question? Thank you. Yes?
I want to ask a question about writing, because it sounds like it came so easily for you. Is it because you were so close to the story, or is it because, not close in the sense, but I mean, you're in finance, or is it because you just just had this idea that you wanted to just move with, or what?
It was really because it was fiction. If I have to write a letter to someone, a business letter or a memo or a business plan or even an important email, I stew over it and panic over it. For some reason with fiction, I just feel like it's coming right from my brain, and I've always had a big imagination. I've always liked drama. I actually wanted to be an actress, so in a way this is sort of a way to do that. And people had said to me in the past, oh, you should write a book on investing, and I thought, oh God, I don't, please, I can't think of anything worse. And also thought there's really not too much that I can put between the pages of a book that isn't already in every other investing book out there. So it was really the fiction. Yes.
Okay, so former East Sider, I've been looking at New York Social Society for years, more so I can see my friends and myself, like, in photos and stuff like that. David Patrick Columbia is a great writer and always puts an interesting spin on things. So I've been reading your column off and on since you started it, and it's improved drastically. So I do have that to say, and I look forward to reading it. So I look forward to reading your book. And so 2 questions. One, with everything that happened with the credit crisis and the debacle and fallout of so many companies and Ponzi schemes coming to the market and everything, do you think a lot of people that still work on Wall Street have considered changing their lifestyles, their careers, making big career changes, or they're kind of in there for the long haul?
Well, for a while, there was obviously the whole thing of don't carry a bag from a department store, put things in brown bags, and obviously people at Goldman, told don't, lay off the G4s, just buy something normal with your bonus kind of thing. But, as happens with Blake, and even with John Cutter to a certain extent, it's very hard to walk away from a lifestyle like that. So I think that there have been very few people who've actually done that, and some people who have left and who went to go work in education for a while actually ended up coming back. There are 2 interesting things, though, that I have seen, and I did write a subsequent column about this. If you worked at Goldman or JP Morgan, you've done very well. If you worked at certain hedge funds, you've done incredibly well, even better. If you were at Lehman and never landed, or you were too over leveraged, or you worked at Bear Stearns and lost that much money in your stock, now all of a sudden there's like this great divide between the ones who survived and thrived and the ones who are really floundering, and it's almost like a secret that nobody wants to talk about. And there are certain people who don't come to events anymore who say, oh, I was sick, or, well, we're just cutting back. And I think it's truly because they have lost so much of their net worth that they can't continue to do that. The other thing I have noticed is, men on Wall Street who make it to CEO or running a big department, they do their job, make a lot of money, and retire in sort of a blaze of glory. And you had so many people who sort of had to leave with their tails between their legs. And some of them want to come back, even if it's working at a small firm and starting all over again. It's like they still want to be carried off the field on the shoulders of their teammates, rather than with a bloody nose and a black eye. So you see a lot of people kind of recreating themselves.
Second question, with this book, complete and successful, are you thinking about writing another one?
I have the outline for the next book. I had started to write it, and then I couldn't get myself going, and I finally realized that this book, I feel like, and I don't want to diminish my 3 wonderful children, but I feel like we've just gotten home from the hospital, and I'm admiring, it's 10 perfect fingers and toes, and I'm just not ready to really start trying to have another baby yet. But the next book will involve a big Ponzi scheme. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, what's your opinion on the whole Lehman bankruptcy? Do you think that it was a good thing, a bad thing? Do you have an opinion on it?
I think that they should have been bailed out. I can't believe that there wasn't an understanding or a discussion about the money market funds and what would happen with all the Lehman commercial paper that was out there. I don't know that I believe that there was a conspiracy. Having read Too Big to Fail, which is one of the most fascinating books that I have read, I think that they were trying to keep up with everything as fast as they could without real answers or real information, and I don't think they originally intended to even bail AIG out until it became apparent how staggering their losses were. But I have a number of friends who are very senior at Lehman who I think the world of and know what they've gone through, and I still cannot believe that they weren't bailed out, and I don't think that things would have gotten as bad as they did if they were bailed out. Yes?
Well, my understanding is that the name Lebenthal was, was associated with conservative approach to investment, municipal bonds, meat and potatoes of building the socialist infrastructure. That's what you developed your expertise. And now all of a sudden you write this book about hedge funds, about these various very risky things. So there are two issues which popped in my mind. First of all, where did you get this expertise and insight in writing this kind of book, socially or professionally? And the second question, don't you think that by writing this book, this may affect adversely your reputation as the conservative approach to investment?
I'll answer the second part first. I don't think so. Actually, in some cases, it's been good for business, believe it or not. I went on CNBC on Monday, and they started with a municipal bond segment and then moved on to talk about the book. Yes, the original Lebenthal was a municipal bond specialist, and then we actually sold the company, and for 4 years I worked for corporate parents, and then we finally got sold to Merrill Lynch in the fall of 2005 without my being involved in that decision, and I didn't like the way that chapter ended, so I started the company all over again. And we do municipal bonds, but we also do other investing today as well. When you work on Wall Street, you kind of have to know about everything that's going on. I'm very involved in my industry, on the board of my trade association. Whether you're dealing with one segment of the markets or not, it's all part and parcel of the bigger economy, the bigger financial markets. And my husband also works at a money management firm that specializes in mortgage-backed securities, so we're living a very interesting life during the financial crisis, as every day they were dealing with their repo lines and their leverage. So kind of learned it all over the years, I would say. Yes?
Getting away from the heavy stuff for a few minutes, I wanted to ask if any of your, quote, socialite friends have read the book and asked you, did you get anything from them that you put in there?
A lot of them have read it. Most of them love it, or nobody's told me that they didn't. I'm very careful not to write about anything that somebody has told me unless I ask the person first. And usually they're actually thrilled to have it included. And the most of the social stuff is really more made up. And actually, I will say that, there's this, as I said, this terrible moniker of socialite and images of certain people who've gotten a lot of press. And then there are actually some women on the scene that I know well who give enormous amounts of money. They're always involved, hands-on in events, and they're really philanthropists and not socialites. And I consider them to be great friends, and I'm glad to know them. So given that they're my friends, I also was careful not to have it be this, exposure of the whole world.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you all coming tonight.